Welcome back to the Deep Dive, and a big welcome to the DRS Zone. Our goal here, as always, is pretty simple. Cut through all the noise, get past the fan arguments, and really deliver the essential truth that's buried in the data you've shared with us. Today, we're diving deep into that red mist over Maranello, the whole crisis situation engulfing Ferrari after, well, a truly disastrous weekend at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
Yeah, and look, this isn't just about not winning races anymore. It's really become a crisis of investment versus actual output. What our sources are showing is a level of fury, really, in the influential Italian press that goes way beyond simple sporting frustration. So we need to break down two key things for you today. First, the specific, sometimes quite personal criticism being aimed at the team and crucially at Lewis Hamilton.
And second, the cold, hard numbers. The sources, they gave us this almost forensic look at Ferrari's finances, and it exposes a really shocking paradox. We're going to show you the actual quantifiable inefficiency of their strategy. We'll dig into the true cost of a single championship point this season compared to last year. It's quite revealing.
It really is. It's kind of the ultimate metric of performance failure, isn't it? You've got these huge expectations set by massive driver salaries on one side and then the actual results in the tarmac on the other, and they're just fundamentally misaligned. The figure that I think should really jump out at every listener is this. We found that Ferrari's cost per championship point, well, it's increased by approximately 316% compared to last year.
316%. Wow.
Exactly. And that numerical collapse, that's precisely what's fueling this intense Italian media outrage we're seeing.
Okay, let's unpack that rage first, because you're right. It's not just noise, it's influential noise, isn't it? The material we looked at really stresses that the commentary published by the Italian press, especially, those big Milanese daily papers, it often lands directly on the desk of Ferrari boss John Elkann. Like every Monday morning, apparently. He sees exactly what they're saying, and the pressure is just instant.
And what's fascinating, I think, is how the press manages to blend this really highly charged emotional language with cold, hard financial stats. It's quite effective. There's this key headline sort of running through the sources that captures the whole issue in just one sentence. The paradox of Ferrari. They don't win, but they have the highest paid driver pairing. Sums it up, really.
Yeah, it does. And the unifying theme in all their anger seems to be the number 0. It's just this constant, almost bitter refrain you see throughout the columns. One author actually stated that 0, quote, describes the deception of a season of vain hope. They point out the SF25 car has been tried in, all conditions, wet, dry, cold, hot, and they've basically never been able to genuinely compete for a win. 0 wins.
And the technical critique of the car itself is just as harsh. They describe the SF25 as having, and this is a direct quote, no positive point. And they repeatedly use this very specific phrase. It has an exigua working window. Now, for listeners maybe not totally familiar with the jargon, that basically means the car only performs optionally in a really narrow, specific range of conditions.
Right, like a very specific tire temperature or maybe a certain track surface.
Exactly. And outside of that tiny window, the car becomes unpredictable and, frankly, slow.
That exigual working window, that obviously makes life difficult for everyone, but you'd think particularly for a driver trying to adapt in his first year with a new team. And this is where that the press keeps hammering home comes in, right? The driver salary figure that sort of provides the foundation for this whole paradox.
Precisely. The sources are citing a total base salary cost of 70 million euros for the current pairing. That's apparently 40 million for Hamilton, 30 million for Leclerc. And importantly, that doesn't even include any performance bonuses they might or might not hit.
70 million euros, just
right.
Let that sink in. To put that in perspective, that makes them, without a doubt, the most expensive driver pairing on the entire grid. You just can't spend that kind of money and expect anything less than championships, can you? So when those huge salaries don't translate into points on the board, the spotlight doesn't just hit the team principal. It lands squarely on the drivers themselves.
And that's exactly where the analysis turns quite personal.
Yeah, this is where the discussion around Hamilton gets really interesting, because the Italian press seems to move beyond just the car's failings and starts targeting him specifically. We saw articles written by Franco Nunez, featured in one of the leading Italian motorsports publications, and they take direct aim at the 7-time champion's performance this year.
Nunez basically argues that age is, quote, taking its toll. Now, the article does sort of acknowledge that Hamilton hasn't, suddenly forgotten how to drive, but it states pretty unequivocally that his trajectory is clearly in decline.
I find that a bit hard to swallow, just given his history, his record. But look, the press doesn't just rely on opinion here. They provide a specific and pretty damning statistic to back it up. The sources consistently highlight that Leclerc is, on average, 0.2 of a second faster per lap than Hamilton.
0.2. Yeah, that's a measurable, repeatable gap. And the press is absolutely using that to, well, weaponize this narrative of decline.
It's relentless pressure, isn't it? The sources also note that Hamilton needs a strong result, like a podium, in one of the 7 remaining races to avoid his first season without one since his debut way back in 2017.
And adding that, quote, lapidary 0 to his personal record, especially given all the fanfare and the immense expectations that came with his Ferrari announcement, well, that would just amplify this whole decline narrative dramatically.
The optics are just terrible, and the criticism feels almost nonstop. But to be fair, the analysis does eventually swing back a bit, connecting the driver's performance back to the engineering realities.
Yeah, the final conclusion seems to be that the poor performance stems from, and this is their phrasing, deficiencies beyond the possible lack of motivation of the British driver.
Which sounds like a slightly complicated way of saying, okay, yes, he's slower right now, but maybe the car is just so fundamentally flawed it's actually hiding the core engineering problem.
That's the critical bridge, I think. The drivers are failing to extract the performance partly because the car itself is compromised. But, and this is the kicker, you still paid the absolute premium price for that premium talent. So this realization of low output despite incredibly high investment, it sets up our financial deep dive perfectly. If performance is way down, but investment is at an all-time high, that efficiency metric becomes brutally important.
Yeah, it stops being just an abstract number and becomes a measure of crisis management, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, exactly. Let's talk money then. Our central question, coming straight from the sources analysis, is how much has the cost of a single Ferrari point actually escalated with the hiring of, arguably, the most expensive driver on the grid?
We need a clear baseline first, right? Last year,
the driver combo was Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. The salary base the publications were working from back then was approximately 25 million euros. That was split roughly 10 million and 15 million between them. Again, we should stress, excluding any bonuses. Okay, 25 million. And after 17 races in that season, Ferrari had racked up a pretty respectable 425 points. So if you analyze that investment versus that output,
the cost per point was completely manageable, really quite efficient for a top team. 58,823, 58,823 euros.
Okay. 58,823 euros.
Okay, 58,823. Think of that as your historical unit cost.
Exactly. Now, we apply the current reality using that 70 million euro base salary figure the Italian publications provided for Hamilton and Leclerc. This year, after the same 17 races, Ferrari has only accumulated 286 points.
286 points. That's a significant drop in output.
That's a huge drop.
So the new calculation is, well, it's genuinely staggering. And I think we should just pause on it for a second. Yeah. With that 70 million euro investment and only 286 points actually achieved, the current cost per point for Ferrari just skyrockets.
It goes up to 244,755.
Wow, almost €250,000 for every single point. Yeah, I think we really need to emphasize that jump for you, the listener. That is the number that just perfectly encapsulates this crisis. Comparing the 2 years side by side, Ferrari's price per point has increased by 316% compared to the previous year.
316%. You're basically spending, 4 times more money for every single point delivered by your top-tier, highest-paid drivers.
Pretty much, yeah. 4 times more.
That's, to put that into real-world terms, that's like paying 4 times the normal price for a loaf of bread, and the bread is still stale when you get it home. It really seems to prove that simply throwing more money at talent, even phenomenal talent like Hamilton and Leclerc, it just doesn't guarantee success if the underlying product, the car itself, is fundamentally compromised by that, what was the phrase?
The exigual working window.
Right, that exigual working window.
And it must create immense internal friction, too. Because this metric, cost per point, it's how you measure efficiency in this budget-capped F1 environment. And it just highlights how incredibly inefficiently they're utilizing their biggest fixed asset, right now, their driver pairing. This financial inefficiency, I'd argue, is the root cause of the media explosion we're witnessing.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture across the whole grid, it raises an important question. Is Ferrari actually the worst spenders in F1 right now? Or are others even less efficient? Our sources provided a really fascinating comparison table, didn't they? Analyzing efficiency across the grid based on estimated salary masses versus points achieved.
Yeah, they did. And look, Ferrari are definitely not the absolute worst, but they are firmly in that inefficient zone. Let's look at the teams running what you might call the bargain business first. The most efficient team on the grid, paying the absolute lowest price per point for their driver's input, is Racing Bulls. Their cost is just 23,076 per point.
23,000 euros. That's incredible, isn't it? They're essentially buying their points for that, while Ferrari is paying nearly 245,000. And even the current constructor champions, McLaren, they're running what the sources described as a tight, round business. Their cost is a very respectable 38,300 euros per point.
Yeah, very efficient. And Mercedes, despite their own relative struggles compared to their dominant years, they're still managing relatively good efficiency at 53,793 euros per point. So those teams kind of set the benchmark for effective spending on driver talent.
Okay, so where does Ferrari sit in that league table? We established their number, 244,755 per point. Where does that rank them?
Well, surprisingly, perhaps, they're not the least efficient. They're the third most expensive per point. Red Bull, where obviously the vast majority of their high salary mass is carried by Max Verstappen's huge contract, they actually sit just below Ferrari, costing 226,470 euros per point.
So hang on, Ferrari is actually paying more per point than the reigning world champions.
Based on these source calculations, yes.
Yeah.
Slightly more.
Okay, that puts it in perspective. Who are the teams even less efficient than Ferrari then?
Well, the price gets pretty steep quite quickly as you go further down the grid. The second most expensive team per point is Aston Martin. Their total driver investment divided by their current 62 points means each point is costing them a hefty 341,935.
Wow, over 300,000 and the least efficient.
The undisputed, absolutely staggering champion of inefficiency this season, according to the sources, is Alpine. With a very high total salary mass divided by their tiny haul of just 20 points so far, the sources calculate that each point is costing the French team an astronomical €500,000. Roughly 500,000 per point.
€500,000 for 1 point. That is truly mind-boggling waste, isn't it?
It really is. But it does provide some context for Ferrari's position, right? They are facing absolutely unprecedented pressure because of that 316% cost increase and, the expectations inherent in the Ferrari brand itself. But they still aren't the absolute most wasteful team on the grid globally. The pressure on Ferrari feels unique because the outrage isn't just driven by general underperformance, which Alpine and Aston Martin are also suffering from, but by the stark, quantifiable financial inefficiency of their highest paid pairing. Combine that with the extreme scrutiny of the Italian home press, and you have a perfect storm.
So, okay, what does this all really mean for you, the listener? We've seen Ferrari pay top dollar for top talent, but the machine, the car they gave them, just isn't allowing that talent to perform efficiently. The criticism leveled at Hamilton's age and perceived decline, while it sounds harsh, it's almost secondary to the primary cold financial failure highlighted by that cost per point metric.
And just to circle back to where this all started, that initial source of rage after Azerbaijan, the Italian sources raise one final, quite potent question, don't they? They sort of imply that this entire crisis, and particularly the intense heat currently on Hamilton, is somehow linked to the really uncomfortable visual juxtaposition of seeing Carlos Sainz, the very man Hamilton replaced, standing on the podium, but in a different car.
Oh, yeah. That's the worst possible PR imaginable, isn't it? The driver they let go for the, $40 million a year star is succeeding almost immediately elsewhere, while their own massive investment struggles. That sight, the press suggests, has really removed things within Maranello, raising swords high for the future. It's just this perfect storm of disappointment, apparent waste, and very public visual failure.
And the conclusion drawn by the press seems crystal clear. Ferrari is undeniably in crisis, and the prospect for 2026, when Hamilton is supposed to be truly leading them into the new regulations, well, it's looking shaky based on these current output metrics.
Okay, well, that, I think, summarizes the essential news and the mood flowing out of Maranello right now. We've taken a deep dive into both the emotional and the financial data, focusing specifically on that staggering 316% cost per point increase and the decline narrative being attached to Lewis Hamilton. So if the SF25's issues really do appear fundamental, maybe here's a final thought for you to explore. Can financial investment in star talent, however big, ever truly outweigh core engineering deficiencies in a sport that is just obsessed with tiny incremental performance gains? That cost per point data might just be a really powerful warning sign, not just for Ferrari, but perhaps for all future high-profile driver contracts right across the F1 grid.
It certainly feels like the clearest indicator you could get that money alone simply cannot solve fundamental engineering flaws.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive here on the DRS zone. If you enjoyed this analysis and you want to stay informed on the essential truths behind the headlines, please do remember to subscribe and maybe like this video. We'll see you next time.